Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Uh-oh. My earring fell off. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. So we are going to get started as soon as I see Dr. Ware log on. You know, Instagram does not give us a lot of time. So I am going to not waste any time and we're going to get started. I'm just setting up so that I can do an audio recording of the conversation as well. Hopefully it will work. We'll see. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I'm so excited for this conversation today. So let me search for, okay. I don't think he's on yet. So I don't think Dr. Ware has joined the call yet. Listen, I have my notebook too. And I just realized something. I have done over 12 IG lives in the month of Ramadan alone. And this is actually the first one that I've ever hosted on my page. And mashallah, to do it with someone that I respect greatly, someone that I admire is amazing. So, okay, he's here. So we're going to get started because we don't want to waste any time. We're live. I hope everybody's ready. We're just waiting for Instagram to do its thing. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. How you doing?
I'm good, alhamdulillah. Everybody's here. We're excited.
MashaAllah. Yeah, no, it's an exciting day. It's good to be with you.
Alhamdulillah. I'm so honored that you agreed to do this, that you are willing to do this. You already know that I'm a huge fan of your work. You're one of my teachers, and for this to be the first Instagram Live that's hosted by Village Auntie, to have you as the guest I couldn't think of anything better. So, alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. Look, you know, we could do the Mutual Admiration Society thing all day. I mean, like, I'm a huge fan, and it's you know, ever since you know, back in Arizona when we visited the masjid and was able to, you know, talk then and, you know, discuss these issues, like, I've been, you know, following and appreciating what you're doing. So keep up the good work, man.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. So we're gonna just dive in, and this is you'll appreciate this. So this notebook is actually from the Dawn of Islam: Prophetic History and Qur'anic Ethics in Real Time.
MashaAllah.
So this is the notebook that I used for that class that you did. So the topic of our conversation today is spiritual and social liberation, lessons from Islamic Africa. And one of the reasons why I'm glad that you are having this conversation is because I honestly don't think that there's anyone that's more suited to discuss this concept in the way that you discuss it. We are in an unprecedented time in our nation's history and global history, and we as Muslims, some of us are in a state of flux, right? We have a personal conundrum. I've had several people reach out to me individually. I've seen discussions on Facebook and other social media that say that Muslims, no matter what color, and some of these are Black Muslims who are saying this, they're saying that we should not be involved in the resistance movement, the civil unrest that's happening right now. This is not our fight. This is not for Muslims. This is bad adab to be out protesting. What do you think about that?
Wow. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. I mean, the first thing that I would say, you know, to that is that the reality is that there is no piety, there is no religiosity that does not also include active engagement for social justice. Because if we're not actually carrying forth a word of justice into the world, then our shows of piety are hypocrisy. But similarly, the activity should never be mistaken for achievement. Simply moving around in the world protesting without having a spiritual orientation to that action is bound to produce a less than sufficient result. So, like, what we really have to do is we have to have that combination that the Quran talks about repeatedly, which is a combination between faith and action. The Quran repeatedly calls for those who believe and do good works. And people forget that, you know, the principal good works that are being referenced there is healing the society around you, bringing benefit to those that are around you. So the truth of the matter is that if you're not engaged in the struggle for justice, your faith is deficient.
So talk to me a little bit about why we would look to Islamic Africa for lessons about social and spiritual liberation. You know, I'll talk a little bit, like, for me as a Muslim, I have the what I consider the privilege of coming into Islam through the community of Sheikh Hassan Sise, right? So I came into a mixed community of Senegambian natives, African Americans, very rooted in African cultural identity. But for someone who's just, you know, a regular Muslim, they've never heard of anything. Why would we take lessons from what is Islamic Africa, and why would we take lessons from there in terms of conceptualizing spiritual and social liberation?
Yeah, it's a beautiful question, and it is the question, right, for the non-Black Muslim, but it's also, to be honest, the question for the Black Muslim, because a lot of African American Muslims don't have a lot of knowledge about what Islam in Africa was all about. So first, just the importance of Islam in Africa, then why it's important for us here. So our Islamic Africa is, you know, informed by the understanding that Africa is actually the only continent in the world that has a Muslim majority. There are more than 340 million Muslims in sub-Saharan Africa, which is more than twice the number of Muslims that live in North Africa. There are more Muslims in Nigeria than there are in Egypt. There are more Muslims in Ethiopia than there are in Iraq. There's a higher percentage of Muslims in Senegal than there is in Syria. You can go from west to east across the African continent, from Senegal to Somalia, and you will find communities that have been part of the Ummah of Islam and spreading Islamic knowledge and light for 1,000 years. And because of the racist formulation of Islamic studies as a discipline and the racist presumptions of largely Arabs and speakers of, you know, the Arabic language, Africa is treated as though it's a footnote in the history of Islam, when in point of fact, Africans have been pioneers in scholarship, and they've especially been pioneers in what I would call Islamic liberation theology. And that liberation theology is something that the Muslims that want to be engaged in active faith-based resistance to tyranny really ought to be studying carefully, whether their ancestors were Black or not. And before you jump in with the next question, I just want to add to that our South Asian and Arab and European American brothers and sisters in faith, they are welcome to claim our ancestors, those enslaved African Muslims that brought Islam to these shores, really actually to what's now Latin America, literally 500 years ago, okay? They're allowed to claim those people as their spiritual ancestors in bringing Islam to the West, if and only if they stand up for our people.
Oof. Well, I don't know about you all, but I already have chills. Listen, and I've heard Dr. Bilal say this before, but every time you just start running down the numbers, it just hits me in a different place, because we really have relegated Africa to a footnote in Islamic history, and this is one case where I think cultural appropriation is okay.
With permission. I mean, the thing is, look, I'm giving y'all liberty to claim to claim your spiritual ancestors in American Islam, but not if you participate in the oppression of my people. And so that means you got to first get educated on who these African scholars were, what they were teaching. You need to include lessons about them in your curriculum in your middle class suburban Islamic schools. Until you do that, you know. It's just a lot of noise. People making tokens of Malcolm when if Malcolm, was around, now, they would be, shunning him because he doesn't pronounce Arabic, like a Yemeni.
SubhanAllah. That statement right there is a whole lie in and of itself. So if
show you right.
Listen, I'm like, you guys are putting up Malcolm, but you have Malcolms in your midst right now that you won't even pray next to. You won't even pray shoulder to shoulder, feet to feet with them, and they are just as relevant and important as Malcolm X. SubhanAllah. So if we're going to allow people, right, with the right context, with the right approach, if they are willing to relinquish their hold on embedded anti-Blackness, right, within themselves, within their communities, who are some of the people that they need to know?
Man, now that you just asked the right question. And you asked the right question, when you say the people that they need to know, because one of the things that's most significant about the African Islamic scholarly tradition is that it has always been a co-educational tradition. Like in my first book on the history of Quran schooling, going back 1,000 years, you find that girls are students in Quran schools, numbering 30, 40, 50, sometimes more than 50% of the students in Quran schools. Oftentimes, teachers are females. Accomplished religious scholars are females.
Wait, stop. Wait, hold on.
Yeah, go ahead.
Stop. Because I've read the Walking Qur'an. If you don't have this book, you need to get this book. You need to buy this book. If I love you, I might buy you a copy of this book. I might do a giveaway for this book. I've bought literally dozens of copies for people. You said that you said a co-educational experience. So when you're talking about co-education, you mean men and women.
Men and women.
And you said that in the Quran school, women are teachers.
Yes, absolutely.
I don't mean to, I just got to say this. I became a Muslim in 1998. Inshallah, this year I will hit my 22nd year as a Muslim. I have never seen a female Quran teacher allowed to teach boys. These are adult women. And maybe it happens. Perhaps it happens.
No, it's true. It's extremely rare in America. And I mean, it's unfortunate. There are whole societies, Somalia and Mauritania being the first two that come to mind, especially in Black Mauritanian society, where females are the majority of the teachers, not a minority amongst the teachers. And many of the most accomplished scholars in West African history specifically, their principal teachers were either female relatives in many cases, or they were just female scholars that were not relatives, that these men studied with and got ijazas with. And in the stories of all of the most important scholars in West African history, and especially those who created powerful social movements that brought dignity, that brought justice, that brought liberation to the people, the key figures in their public and spiritual lives were oftentimes female teachers or their daughters or female students that took forward the message. So it's always been the gender dynamics, those oppressive gender dynamics that in Arab and South Asian societies, especially in the recent past, are just absent from the way that Islam unfolded organically in West Africa. Because look, how are you supposed to educate a society if you systematically exclude half of the population? It don't even make no sense. You're obviously not actually about the task of spreading, the word of Islam, nor of teaching knowledge of the Quran if you exclude half of the population from your efforts.
SubhanAllah. There's some people who are asking questions, and they're saying, can a woman teach a man? And can a woman recite Quran in front of a man? When I lived in Saudi Arabia, the women could teach the little boys, but they couldn't teach men because they said that a woman's voice was aura. And what it makes me think about is when we insert these oppressive cultural dynamics, we alter the confines of Islam. We reduce Islam to this small little thing that you can just stick in the pocket of your soul, as opposed to being this expansive life experience that, as you said, includes both parts of humanity. So what do you say to people who say that, you know, a woman's voice is outer, a woman shouldn't teach men? You talk about, you know, scholars who had teachers who were women. Who were some of those people, and were they men when they were learning from these women?
Yes, they were men when they were learning from these women. They weren't children, and they're some of the most important and accomplished religious scholars. So let's start with one to make this conversation concrete. Okay, if you get a copy of the Walking Qur'an and you open to chapter 3, the principal figure in chapter 3 is a person called Abdul Qadir Khan. Abdul Qadir Khan was a Quran scholar from the Fulani ethnic group, mastered Quran at an early age, began studying Maliki fiqh, then went on to teach Maliki fiqh. He became a person who was an accomplished legal scholar who people submitted cases to him for judgment independently. He wasn't somebody that was backed by any state authority. Muslims would travel from all over to go have cases adjudicated by him without any state structure behind him. It was just his authority as a righteous and pious scholar. In the 1770s, when the Atlantic slave trade was at its height, this is the slave trade that brings between 12 and 20 million people in bondage from West and West Central Africa, really from the African continent as a whole, but 3/4 of those people come from the region between the Senegal and the Senegal River and Angola. So it's mostly from West and West Central Africa. So that's the entirety of the trade. It's at its height in the 18th century, okay? And it's really, just in the 18th century alone, there's something like 7 million people that are taken into bondage on the African continent and sold into slavery in white societies and Western societies. So Abdul Qadir Khan, this humble Quran teacher and legal scholar, ends up leading a movement not just to abolish the Atlantic slave trade, but to end the institution of slavery in the society that he was born into. It's the first modern abolitionist movement in the world. It abolishes the institution of slavery before the Haitian Revolution does so in the 1790s. 1776 is the year that this group takes power in the Senegal River Valley. And there's lots of contemporary documentation that said that they ended the purchase of human beings, period. Okay? And this is a story that you will not find in most of your books, but it's documented in that in that chapter. And I'm actually writing another book now about the whole revolution. To answer your question, the primary fiqh teacher, the primary legal scholarship teacher of Abdul Qadir Khan was a woman called Khadija bint Muhammad al-Aql al-Daimaniya. She was from a Mauritanian lineage of scholars that had originally been of the Shadhali Tariqa, who then became part of the Qadiri Tariqa. She was such an accomplished scholar in her time that her own brothers, who had received ijazahs from their father to teach legal texts, had to go back and get their ijazahs renewed with their baby sister, because nobody was thought of as having an authoritative ijazah for legal matters unless they had an ijazah from Khadija bint Muhammad al-Aql.
Are y'all hearing this? I need everybody who's on the live right now, who's making comments about a woman's voice being outer, people who are making comments about the fact that there are no women scholars. I have mixed emotions right now. And I know this story. I've read like this book. This is just one of the copies. This is the autographed copy. So this is the least used copy that I have. I know this, and every time I hear this, I'm angry. And I'm angry because we don't know this history. 1776 should take a completely different feeling in our hearts.
Completely different meaning, exactly.
A completely different meaning.
Because sister, look, as Americans, we sold out on the slavery question, right? We went with that whole 3/5 of a person nonsense. But in this revolution, and would you like to know how Abdul Qadir Khan accomplished this liberation within the framework of Islamic law?
Yes, I know, but I want everybody else to know.
Everybody else, I know you know, because you read my book cover to cover. I've seen it with
Yes.
highlighter marks and Post-it notes all in it.
Yes, everywhere.
Mashallah. His position was that the shahada that frees a human being from torment and humiliation in the next world must also set them free from torment and humiliation in this one. His position was that any person capable of reciting a single verse of the Quran should not be held in bondage. And he said in the oral traditions that the Muslim that should be protected from the indignities of enslavement is the one that says La ilaha illallah, even if he pronounces it Ra ilaha illallah. In other words, the person can be brand new to the religion, but if they pronounce these words with sincerity, then they are to be let free. And in doing so, all he was doing was drawing on his teachings from Khadija bint Muhammad al-Aqtab, who had been highlighting, and these are important, hadiths that are transmitted but then forgotten about this problematic question of slavery, right? Umar ibn al-Khattab himself would set free any captives of war that he saw praying. And they said to him, "Oh, commander of the faithful, don't you know that they are just deceiving you to have their freedom?" And he would say, "Better to be deceived by the one who deceives us in favor of God than to keep in bondage the one who prays to him."
Woo. Are y'all hearing? I need to know if you all are hearing this. I need you to put a thumbs up, a heart, or something. I hope you have your notebooks out. I hope you have a pen out. I need you to know and hear this information. It was the teaching of a woman, the generosity, the nurturing, the subtlety of womanhood that imbued him with this sense of justice from our tradition. His teacher was a woman.
She has surviving texts that you can still find in Mauritania that are written on philosophy, on logic, on rhetoric.
And when we think about places like Mauritania, right? Because I'm wearing a Mauritanian dress because it's hot. I learned very early on.
So hot today. Oh my God. Okay.
One of the ways I could cope with Phoenix heat was to dress like people in other deserts dress, right? And someone said the most ignorant comment. They said, "Do people even live in Mauritania?" I thought all they did was live. It's nothing but dirt there. It's nothing but sand there. And just Mauritania as a country, as a fountain of Islamic knowledge, even in contemporary times, is completely glossed over. It's completely glossed over.
It's true. I mean, perhaps to a lesser extent than sub-Saharan countries, properly speaking. I think people don't understand the depth of knowledge that you can get in Senegal, the depth of knowledge that you can get in northern Nigeria, the depth of knowledge that you can find in places like Mali and Niger. I think that Mauritania has been given a certain amount of attention because of some prominent American scholars who have studied there.
Also, how they look. They light skinned.
Well, okay.
Some of them can get. You don't have to say it. I'll say it.
Listen. I will say on this live the following. I do think that it's problematic that the only piece of the West African Islamic legacy that has been given public prominence in American Islam is the Baidan version of it, is the one that's associated with people who claim white identity in Mauritania, even though that is actually a minority population in Mauritania. The group that claims Arab Berber descent without any kind of African descent is 30 to 40% of the population. The majority of the population is either of enslaved background or they're sub-Saharan Africans that live in Mauritania. But I think it's problematic that scholars coming from one racist society go to another racist society and bring religious knowledge from that racist society back to this racist society without ever interrogating the racial privilege that inheres in both societies.
Listen.
Do you feel me?
I don't think they caught that. Some people know, and we're not going to name any names because we don't do that, right?
Look, I'm never going to call.
We have good adab, but those who know that there has been this idea that there are only certain people that you can take from in Mauritania, and they are this very small small minority of people. And you know, you said something that I think, you know, we definitely have to circle back to.
Sure.
Mauritania has not been given as much, it's been given a little bit more freedom of expression than places like northern Nigeria and Senegal.
Yep.
So who should we know from these places? I know who we know, but who should we know from places like Senegal? Because I have to say this one thing. I have a friend, and she is my friend. She's still my friend. And you're going to wonder why she's still my friend after I say what I say. I'm going to tell you why she's still my friend. Right?
Because we're forgiving and patient people, sister.
Well, I don't know. She said, and from her face, her whole entire Black African-American face said there's no Islam in Africa.
Damn it.
She said,
sorry, did I say that?
Listen, I told you. I want you to finish drinking what you were drinking because I don't want you to spit it out. She said there's no Islam in Africa. She said maybe Egypt, but you know, Egypt is really a part of the Middle East, but there's no Islam in Africa. And I was literally speechless for a few minutes. I did not know what to say. So we had a whole conversation, and she continued to say, you can't name any West African scholar from Senegal, from Ghana, from any of these places that have made any significant contribution to Islamic tradition. And I told her, just because you don't know their names does not mean that they did not make a contribution. And she's only still my friend because I said, I can't leave her out in the wilderness like this. And she got her children a Qur'an teacher. Guess where he was from?
Hopefully Senegal.
Gambia.
Yeah,
even
6 of one,
better.
6 of one, half dozen of the other. It's the same.
He was from Gambia, and she calls me one day. She says, Angelica, oh my gosh. I said, what? She said, how come you didn't tell me? I said, how come I didn't tell you what? She said, he's a Hafiz Qur'an. Everybody in his family is Hafiz Qur'an. How come you didn't tell me? So I said all of that to say, what is the Islamic intellectual legacy in places like Senegal, Gambia, and northern Nigeria? What do we need to know?
Okay. So the basics, the first part to understand is that in contradistinction to Islam in North Africa, in all of the places of the so-called caliphate, Islam is not spread to sub-Saharan Africa through any military occupation. It is transmitted across the desert first by merchants and then by itinerant scholars. But very early on in the 8th century CE, indigenous West African lineages themselves start to specialize in the teaching of the Quran and spreading of Islamic knowledge. So Black people spread Islam to Black people, and they do it not with the jihad of the sword, but with the jihad of the wooden board. The lauh, or the alwa as it's called in Wolof and other languages. The first thing to understand is that this is not a political nor a military conversion process. This is a spiritual and social liberation that takes place through teaching.
So it's the jihad of the pen.
It's the jihad of the pen. It's the jihad of the pen.
I'm plugging as we go.
Oh yeah, book 2. Sorry, your screen is actually frozen, so I can only see my fat head talking while we're going.
That's okay.
But as long as my feed isn't messed up for anybody else.
It's not. It's not. So my feed isn't frozen on this side because someone said just hold up the book. This is Jihad of the Pen, the Sufi literature of West Africa. Who's in this book and why are they important?
Okay. In this book, we have translated writings from, I'll go in chronological order. Okay. Uthman Dan Fodio, who follows in Abdul Qadir Khan's revolutionary tradition, fighting against the enslavement of Muslims by Muslims. Okay, and I'm going to return to each of these in turn, but we're just going to go quick through the list. The next, and his writings in that piece are translated by 2 amazing scholars, Aisha Bewley, who pioneered translations of Dan Fodio's writing in the 70s, and our dear beloved brother Sheikh Mohammed Sharif, who with Sankore Institute has been absolutely translating all of his works, has this encyclopedic knowledge about the Sheikh Uthman Dan Fodio's writings. And we worked on that section together, writing a brief biography of Uthman Dan Fodio and then presenting 3 beautiful representative samples of his writing. The next person that is treated in that book is El Haj Umar al-Futi Tal, El Haj Umar, as he's often called. And he is the person who first spreads the Tijani Tariqa in sub-Saharan Africa. is one of the most brilliant intellectuals of the 19th century, and he's also a person who leads emancipatory social movements all throughout West Africa, and he's often forgotten for that fact. But just one detail about El Hadj Umar, whose works are translated in that book by Amir Syed, a graduate student of mine who did a PhD. He teaches at the University of Pittsburgh now. The library of El Hadj Umar Tal, which was stolen by the French government when they colonized Mali in 1895, was taken to the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, the French National Library. El Hadj Umar's library had 4,100 separate manuscripts in it.
Manuscripts meaning something he wrote?
Meaning all of the manuscript books that he had collected over the course of his career. Some of those
How many was that?
4,100 separate catalog items. And some of those 4,100 manuscripts, like a single manuscript might range from 3 to 5 pages, or it might be 600 to 700 pages, depending on what the text is. So these are bookish Negroes. These are people that have been writing and reflecting on text and have been teaching and engaging scholarship for centuries. Look, when I was in DC as a kid with my nose buried between the pages of a book, people accused me of acting white. I didn't know at the time that my ancestors had been reading and writing the Arabic language, reading and writing African languages using the Arabic script, and teaching religion to the world for 1,100 years.
Subhanallah. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar.
So El Hadj Umar Tal is number 2. I'll just finish the list and then you can jump in with additional questions. Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba Mbake is the 3rd, the founder of the Tariqa Muridiyya. Just what scholars have been able to catalog of his works, modern scholars, at least 200 distinct books in the Arabic language that he authored himself. Okay, some of those are collections of as many as 200 distinct poems, and some of those poems contain more than 5,000 lines. So just real quick, run the math. Right, this is one of history's most prodigious scholars, and we're going to talk about him in a moment. But in the second half of his life, all of his writing was just dedicated to composing praise poetry to praise the best of creation, the Messenger of God, alayhi afdal salatu wasalam.
MashaAllah.
Just love poetry for the Prophet.
Listen.
Peace be upon him.
Listen.
Last one, and I'm gonna catch my
breath. There's more.
Take a minute. You asked who's in the book. You asked who's in the book, so I'm finishing. There are 4 authors that are under translation in the book. So I do the translations for Bamba. Amir did the translation for El Hadj Umar. Sheikh Muhammad Sharif and Aisha Bewley did the ones for Uthman Danfodio. lastly, translating the writings of Sheikh Ibrahim Yas, Sheikh al-Islam, the Sahib al-Faida, a man who at his passing had 50 million people just in his branch of his tariqah. This is a person who had over 111 texts that have been cataloged by modern scholars. And the way that Bamba was gifted for poetry, Niasse was gifted for prose. He was capable of constructing incredibly precise arguments that were impossible to refute. So his works are translated in that volume by the first graduate student that I trained that worked with me back when I was at Northwestern, our beloved brother. We send our salams to him, Zachariah Wright. So we brought together 4 giants of this tradition and presented their writings together in translation in one volume so that people can see how their spiritual seeking was related to their transformative action in the world. All of these men founded movements that changed West Africa and made it a more peaceful place, made it a more beautiful place, adorned the insides of people. And we'll talk about those social changes in just a minute. But I just wanted to answer the question. These writings are under study there. And the last thing I'll say is Brother Zachary wrote the introduction. I wrote the conclusion. And the conclusion to the volume is my effort to not only integrate the teachings of these 4 different scholars, but to also bring in those other Mauritanian scholars, other Nigerian scholars, other Malian scholars to make an argument about what the contents of West African Sufism really are. And it's about, that conclusion is called Jihad of the Pen, the Prophet, the Quran, and Islamic Ethics. And it's about the relationship between Sufism as a science of ethics and Sufism as a science of spiritual realities. Akhlaq on the one hand and haqa'iq on the other. And the relationship is that the action in the world, that ethical action that produces just societies, and this process of spiritual elevation are fundamentally inseparable the one from the other. That as one struggles to make the world around them more just and more beautiful, their spiritual station is progressively raised. And as one's spiritual station is progressively raised, they become more effective instruments for change in the world.
Subhanallah, subhanallah. So I'm seeing some comments coming in that will get you blocked. Okay. So I gotta come out of my, gentle Phoenix, village auntie, and I need to be Angie from Detroit for like 2 minutes, okay? So if you have a problem with anything that's being said on this live, if you think it's trivial, so there was a comment that said, what's the purpose of this discussion? Is it going anywhere, or is this just for trivia? If you don't understand the context of knowing that Islam was not spread by the sword in West Africa. Islam was spread through the intellectual legacy of Black Muslims. If you do not understand the importance of the prolific nature of our intellectual tradition as West African Muslims, you can kindly exit this live right now, because we don't need that energy in here. Okay?
Don't let the door hit you where the good Lord splits you.
Listen, because they don't know, like, you in Cali and I'm in Phoenix, but they don't know we are from the hood. So there are people who are benefiting from this information, and so I don't want it to get sidetracked. And I really want it to understand this is not just Dr. Bilal running down a list of names. Okay, he's running down a list of names within context. Some of you are on this live and you're saying, I'm from Senegal, I didn't know this. Some of you, I know for a fact, are students of knowledge, and you're saying you didn't know this. You didn't know the poetry of Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba. Mikhail Ahmed Smith at Qalam Institute, mashallah, he had a class where he actually dissected one of the poems of Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba. And it was the first time that I had seen someone other than you who did that in that type of framework, and the people who did not know him. And he admonished people and said that this is not a tradition for Black Muslims. This is a tradition for Muslims, period.
I'll go further than that. It is a universal tradition that is meant to provide benefit to all of humanity. Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba was a mercy to all creation. Sheikh Ibrahim Niasse was a mercy to all creation.
Mashallah, mashallah, mashallah. I love Sheikh Ibrahim Niasse, so
of course,
I love all of them. But when
you
say by Niasse, seeing his picture before I even became a Muslim, when I went to Senegal, and when I went to Ghana, in 1997, I saw this picture of this old Black man everywhere. And I was like, dang, he got a lot of kids. Like, was he a singer? Is he an actor? What is he? I had no idea who he was. And it was, seeing the love that people had for Baye Niasse and understanding, reading about his legacy is what helped me finally make that step into conversion. And one of the things that helped me get there was understanding his stance on women and women seeking knowledge. When I heard about the fact that he took it upon himself to personally educate his daughters, to personally make sure that they take on sacred knowledge, that was very important.
I had to plug up my phone. Forgive me.
Okay, no problem. You're good.
I'm struggling a little bit.
You're
Go ahead. Continue.
No. I was just saying that for people who don't understand why this is important, Sheikh Ibrahim Niasse, his face is one of the reasons that, got me to study more about this knowledge and more about this information. So I think it's extremely important that we're having this conversation. And I know for Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba in particular, his entire life, right, was really him trying to rail against the oppressive forces in his life. Can you talk to us a little bit about who he was? Because we know he was a prolific writer. We know that he was an erudite scholar, but what is it about his life? What lessons can we learn from his life about how to live in the midst of oppression and political upheaval?
Right. So the first thing that this audience needs to understand about Ahmadou Bamba is that he was a direct inheritor of that revolutionary tradition of Abdul Qadir Khan and Uthman Danfodio that struggled against enslavement, that struggled against the very evil that brought our ancestors into bondage in this land. There was in the time when he was just becoming a significant scholar of repute in the region, and this was before the French occupation became, kind of closed in 1895.
Mm-hmm.
One of the Wolof nobility, the Wolof nobility was known for trading slaves with Europeans, and the religious scholars had railed against them for centuries for this practice. But some of the religious scholars were complicit, but others had protested. And Bamba was one of these latter categories. So a man from the nobility came, and as his hadiyah, as his gift, when he made his njabalu, his bayah, to Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba, he offered him a gift of a slave. Okay, and Ahmadou Bamba looked at the nobleman, and he asked him a question. He said, "You own this man?" And the man said, "Yeah." And Bamba responded to him. He said, "Soko mome, yama mom, dachmak mom, nyo boko borom," which means, if you own him, then you own me, because he and I have the same master.
Subhanallah. Subhanallah.
Ahmadou Bamba's commitment to justice, equality, and dignity for human beings was the core of his message. And his primary constituency when he was teaching under house arrest. By the way, this is a man who the French colonial authorities arrested in 1895. They sent him into exile for 7 years and 9 months. Okay, when he returned back from this in 1902, he lived the rest of his life until 1927 under résidence surveillée, house arrest. This man did not live a day free in his life in the last 32 years of his life. Yet he never wrote with any bitterness. He never wrote with any hatred towards those that had oppressed him. Instead, he taught. He transformed souls. And what happened was that all of the people that had been oppressed, either by the traditional slave trading kings or by the new colonial authorities, flocked to his communities. Because in his communities, people didn't ask questions about whether your father was free or what he did for a living. If you were willing to go to the farm to work, if you were willing to go to the mosque to pray and to send your children to the Qur'an school to learn the Qur'an, you was all good with him. And it was his established practice to take former people that were formerly of slave status, and when they had memorized Qur'an, if they any part of Qur'an, if they were pious people, he would have them lead the prayer. And if people came from noble status, he would have them fetch water and tend to animals.
Listen.
To knock them down a peg. Is any of this sounding familiar for where we at right now?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So Bamba's message was liberatory, not just in the next world, in the sense of spiritual seeking, but it was liberatory in this, which brings us to Sheikh Ibrahim, because his followers often described him as the hope in this life and in the next.
Inshallah.
The promise in this life and in the next. And even though they belong to different Sufi movements, Bamba, the founder of the Muridiyya, Sheikh Ibrahim within the great tariqah of Sheikh Ahmed Tijan Sharif, the tariqah Tijaniya. Listen, Sheikh Ibrahim grew up 50 miles away from Tuba. As a child in
tell people what Tuba is. People don't know what Tuba is.
Tuba is the city that Ahmadou Bamba founded, which became the center of his teaching. So thank you for that. So Sheikh Ibrahim grew up, you know, in the not too far away. That look, if you today, if you drive from Tuba to Kaolack, Medina Bay, where Sheikh Ibrahim established his community, you know, you can be there, you know, in an hour's time, or a little less than that. So they weren't far from one another. And Sheikh Ibrahim quoted Ahmadu Bamba in his writings. They shared a great deal in common in terms of their perspective, their focus on traditional scholarship and education, and especially in their love for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I mean, if you read Nyas's poetry, even though I focused on Bamba's poetic legacy, it's not like Sheikh Ibrahim's poems are not fire, because they are.
He brings it. No, he definitely brings it.
He brings all of it. He brings all of it. So the one thing that I'll say is that if you want to kind of understand them within the trajectory of social change in West Africa, not just in you know, within their respective movements, is that what Ahmadu Bamba does for liberating people of slave or so-called casted background, Sheikh Ibrahim extends that to women.
Yes. Come on.
His movement is the one that explicitly makes the argument that in dhikr, for sure, the woman's voice is not aura. So the women should be heard when they're making dhikr, when they're making wazir. And it's one of the most common features of the Tijani daily office throughout West Africa and in America, and now in South Africa and Albania and Indonesia and everywhere where this movement has spread, everywhere that the flood has touched. That is a part that comes with it. Because, and this is something that's really significant, is that Sheikh Ibrahim wrote about this. He explained specifically that since the time of prophethood has ended, there is no spiritual station that is open to a man but closed to a woman.
Yes. Yes. Say that. Please say that again.
There is no spiritual station that is open to a man that is closed to a woman. The time of prophethood is over. The Khatam al-Anbiya, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when the light went out of his blessed eyes, we entered into the time of wilaya instead of nubuwah. And in that, the scholars of Sufism are unanimous in the opinion that the first supreme saint, the first qutb, was Fatima Zahra, was the Prophet's own daughter. So for sure, there is no spiritual station that a man can aspire to that a woman cannot. And one of the principal problems, and I talked about this in a live this weekend, one of the principal problems in the modern Muslim community is that because there are certain ritual roles that are prescribed for men, it's really pressing that we highlight the fact that spiritual and intellectual authority and social authority are not things that women should be systematically excluded from. How are you going to have balance in the religion? There's no barriers to spiritual achievement.
A woman can be a religious authority?
Of course, it's not just that women teach Quran and the Islamic religious sciences in West Africa. Women also serve as initiators in Sufi movements, not just to other women, but also to men. Because if a woman can have a more elevated spiritual station than a man, then shouldn't the man be taking the initiation from her?
You know, that was a rhetorical question for the people who are wanting
My bad.
to ask.
Sorry, I didn't mean to sound like I was talking down. I do know you know this.
No, I'm saying that for the people because I want to make sure that they're listening, because I think a lot of people think, well, women can't be imams. I don't want to be an imam. And when we think about, like, I wouldn't want to be an imam, you know what I'm saying? Like, but when people think about in America, in the West, I'll say, we've set up this hierarchy within Islam, and we put the imam at the top. But the imam is literally just the person who's leading the salah. The imam doesn't have to be a scholar. He doesn't have to, he doesn't have to have a certain, like, we expect that in the West because we've made Islamic community centers and we expect our imams to be all encompassing, but an imam is not necessarily a scholar. A woman can be.
Of course. Well, and can I take that a step further?
Please, please take it all the way.
the reality is that our models of what the appropriate social roles for an imam are have nothing to do with the Islamic tradition. They are filling the prescribed role of religious authorities that churches and synagogues have established in Western societies. We've just followed in behind them. So we have a separation of public and private spheres, and our religious authorities in our communities play essentially the same functional role in the social structure. So our actual positioning of Islamic knowledge in our communities is not derived from the tradition. It's derived from the Western sociological it's derived from Western social history and also from the history of the church. And because of that, we've lost sight of the fact that imams and ulama are not the same thing. Okay, we've lost sight of the fact that someone cannot claim to be an alim when they're really at best a faqih, when they're really at best somebody that knows a little bit of fiqh, because a person of knowledge, an alim, is supposed to be a consummate scholar in multiple disciplines of the religious sciences. Because we have taken the slot that is reserved for religion in Western societies, our understanding of what a religious authority is essentially someone who insists on obedience to religious rules. And therefore it is spiritually impoverished. And we have created an entirely new religion that we could call fiqh.
Come on now. Come on now. I need my church fans. Since we're talking about church, I need my fans.
That doesn't have anything to do with Islam in total. And Islam as a title for this religion is also reductive. In that, in the hadith of Jibril, where the Prophet, peace be upon him, is sitting with his companions and Jibril comes in human form and quizzes him on the contents of the religion, he explains that it is the submission with the limbs, those 5 pillars of Islam, which is all about what you do with your body. That corresponds to the level of Sharia, the external law. That's where we stop as Muslims in this community, is at the externalities of the law. But the hadith goes on. Jibril asks him, and tell me of Iman. And he says it is to believe in God, his books, his messengers, his angel, the decree, and the last day. So 6 articles of faith to go with 5 pillars of practice. And this is something that is about understanding rather than mere movement of the limbs. Okay, and maybe some of us get to a deep interior understanding, but usually in our communities that happens at the level not of the heart but of the intellect. And this is another real crucial point. Now I just wanted to establish this aql, this intellect that some scholars talk about, that people use as a category, does not occur in the Quran, nor does it occur in any authentic hadith. If a human being has a mind, God didn't see fit to point it out in his book. The mind is an abstract concept that comes from Greek folk thought that gets operationalized by Western imperialist authorities, and we pretend as though it's a real thing. What the Quran says is that human beings have a qalb, they have a sadr, they have a fu'ad. All of these are references to the heart, so that emotion, intellection, perception, cognition, spirituality, intellectual work, all of it takes place in the same organ. None of this nonsense about separating masculine forms of knowing from female forms of knowing, because one is about intellect and the other is about emotion. No, all of that takes place in the same place in the Quran. And I often tell people that, listen, if you want to make a proper study of human beings, and I'm actually going to talk about this in another live with Sister Wafa Salam Judas coming up next Tuesday. If you want to understand what a human being actually is, stop studying what anthropologists say about it, because who's better equipped to do a study of man than the maker of man? Allah ya'lamu man khalaqa wa huwa latiful khabir. Would he not know he who created, and he is the subtle, the informed. So if God says that this heart is a real thing that's inside you, for sure it is. Now, if you tell me that a human being has a brain, that's an organ that I can point to in your body. If you tell me that they have a mind, that's a fiction that people made up. Point to it, show me how it exists. God never mentions it, so how do I know it's real? It may or may not correspond to a thing that actually exists, but I know for sure that the heart is a real thing. And the Hadith Qudsi says, neither my heaven nor my earth contain me, but I'm contained in the heart of my believing slave. So that's the place where real knowledge has to take root. Imam Malik said that real knowledge is a light that God casts into the breast of whosoever he wills. It is not the accumulation of many facts. It is not the accumulation of many facts. It is not the accumulation of many facts. And I'm just going to say one last thing, is that even the Islam and the Iman do not complete the faith. Ihsan is what is required to complete it. So as long as we're stuck on the externalities, we will never get to the core. And what is ihsan in that same hadith of Gabriel? What is excellence? And the hadith says it is to worship God as though you see him. And if you do not see him, knowing that he sees you. And when they say it in Wolof, the way that it's usually said, it's to worship God while seeing him. And if you can't see him, then it's knowing that he sees you. And that is about a spiritual reality. So if we just stick to the externalities of the law, or even a deeper understanding of the principles of the faith, but one that takes place in a fictional organ called the mind, how will we ever get to the heart where the vision of the divine is actually possible?
Listen, we all the Jumas that we missed during quarantine, we just got them in the last hour. Like all of the khutbahs that we missed, like we just got, like, I don't. So we have 5 minutes left.
Okay.
People are asking for a part 2. Inshallah, bismillah. This is the first.
Can I respond to a question that I just saw come across?
Please.
Somebody asked about all of the akala that occur in the Quran. And it's true, akala appears as a verb many times in the Quran, too many times to count. But if you look at what the organ that does the intellection, what the organ that does the akalaing, the thing that does the understanding in the Quran, it's always the heart. They have hearts, but they do not understand with them. They have hearts, but they do not reflect with them. Check your Quran. Aql does not appear as a noun.
It doesn't. SubhanAllah. So we might have to stop this live and come back for we might need to give them like another 15 minutes or so. I don't know.
Let's everybody take a deep breath. Okay.
Yes.
We'll take a deep breath. And we'll be reminded that was the breath that was breathed by our Lord into our ancestor Adam. And we'll give it back to him. We're going to take it in slow, and we're going to breathe it out just with a hu. Okay, and then we'll cut the live, and then you're going to start it back up, and we'll take questions.
Okay, inshallah. Okay. Everybody ready? So we're going to cut this live right now. Yes, I will save it, inshallah, and we'll be right back. Okay, so don't move. Call your friends. We'll be right back. Listen, don't ever say, I didn't give you anything. Don't ever say that you didn't get anything from this page, because you just got a whole Islamic school education in the last hour, the last 57 minutes. Don't ever say you didn't get anything. Allahu Akbar. Okay, I'm going to cut the live. We'll be back in a minute, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.